Hi, everyone. This is your host, Michael Hingson, and you are listening to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. And today, our guest is Dario, if I'm pronouncing that right, Valenza. How do I
Yeah,
pronounce it? Oh, good.
Valenza.
Oh, good. I can sometimes speak the King's English really well. Dario is a person who has a great passion for design, and he's going to tell us about that. He has been involved in designing many things from yachts to aircraft to other kinds of things, as well as teams in companies, which I think is very fascinating, that make products and bring things about. So we're going to get to all of that. Dario is in Australia. So it's early in the morning there for you right now, but welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So, what time is it over there right now?
About 11 a.m.
Yeah, and it's little after three here. So, yep, you're 20 hours ahead of us. Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
so
go.
here it's Saturday. I assume there it's Friday.
It is.
To add
Uh,
to the confusion.
so as it's always fun to do, can you tell us about the future over the next 20 hours? Um,
Yeah. So far so good.
Yeah, there you are. Well, thank you for being here and for being a part of Unstoppable Mindset. Let's start, if you would, by maybe you telling us a little bit about kind of the early Dario growing up and some of those kinds of things so that people listening and watching can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interest in how things worked was there as long as anyone can remember. Being exposed early on to different mechanical things and from household appliances to looking at trains and buses and cars outside. I think that all piqued my curiosity. But I remember the first time I came across the concept of a sailboat, something clicked. There was something about the way an airfoil works, the way you can generate motion out of wind, the balance of forces, the structures, the things that all need to work for a sailboat to work. That sort of got me hooked. And then I spent every waking moment I could reading about it, doing research, making models that I'd sail across the pool, getting involved at the local sailing club, and just being hands-on. And I think that's really where the passion started. So certainly there's a general wanting to see how things work, and there's a specific aerodynamics, hydrodynamics, structures. I find it endlessly fascinating, and you're always learning.
And should always be learning. I think that's one of course, the real keys is always learning, which some people think they don't do, but and some people try very much not to do, but that's not the way to really progress in the world. So I'm glad that you do that. You've always lived in Australia?
No, actually born in Italy.
Okay.
Moved here probably 10 years old. Went to high school and uni here.
Yeah, you do seem to have a little bit more of an Australian accent than an Italian one.
Yeah, I think I was young enough when I moved that I learned the language pretty quickly. I did spend a few years in New Zealand and a few years in Europe, so I think my accent is probably a little bit of a hybrid, but mostly Australian, I'd say.
Do you speak Italian?
Yeah, it's still
Oh, yeah,
native
there you
language.
go.
It's funny, you get rusty at it though. Like when I go back, it probably takes me a few days to get used to speaking it.
Yeah,
But it is in there.
which makes some sense. Well, so you went to high school, and did you go on to college?
Did the first couple of years of an engineering degree.
Mm-hmm.
Dropped out to go do the America's Cup.
Ah,
Eventually went back and finished it, but really haven't spent more time working than studied, putting it that way. The things I was interested in, particularly the advent of carbon fiber in racing yachts, hadn't found its way into any curriculum yet. It was happening on the frontier in that environment, and so my judgment was you could learn more by doing it than by going to uni.
well, yeah, on the one hand, with school, to a large degree, it's theory, and putting it into practice is something that always brings you closer to it, which makes sense. Well, so you when you went to your first America's Cup, what did you were you just an observer? Were you involved in designing a yacht or what?
I was a boat builder.
Okay.
I was hands-on on the manufacturing, and that was the way in. That was the opportunity I had to actually be part of the team and prove myself. Over the course of the campaign, I obviously showed an interest in design and I became more de facto part of the design team. But I really always like to sit at that interface between the designing and the building so that there's a
Hmm.
practical element to, yes, there's a theory, yes, there's a design, there's a bunch of analysis you can do. Having that practical mindset of, is it easy to build? Is it practical? Is it possible to then tune it and modify it and improve it? And that actually led me to a lot of the logistical challenges of how do you plan a build? How do you allocate time towards the things that make the biggest difference towards performance? So the journey was really from hands-on boat builder to sort of logistics to design.
Uh-huh. Well, and design has clearly been your passion overall, so that makes some sense. When did you do your first America's Cup?
So I was involved in the 2000 event in Auckland, which was the first time the Kiwis defended after winning in 95.
Right.
Then I did 2003 also in Auckland, 2007 in Valencia. And then there was a bit of a hiatus after Valencia because of the deed of gift match. And I was involved in a couple of teams as that transition happened. And eventually, 2012, I peeled off to start my own business.
So let's see, the New Zealand won in 2000, right?
They defended successfully in 2000. So they won in 95 in San Diego
Right.
against Dennis Conner. Then it
Yes.
took them 5 years to basically set up a defense. So from 95 to 2000. And then they won and they rolled straight into 2003. They
They
lost in
they
2003
lost. That was to Italy, was it?
to the Swiss,
Or to the
Berlingi.
Swiss, right. Okay.
Even though the core of the sailing team was the former New Zealand team, they're basically um, flag of allegiance. But yeah, the Berlingi team
Now,
was the first time successful challenger, which is amazing.
were you living in New Zealand in 2003?
Yes, yeah. So when you become involved in a team, basically the whole operation camps out at a base in the lead up to the event. Um, at the time, the yacht still had to be constructed in country. So in 2003, for example, I was with a Swedish team. I actually spent a little bit of time in Sweden during the construction of the yacht, and then we traveled with the yacht to New Zealand and stayed there for the duration.
I asked because I went to New Zealand in May of 2003. The Royal New Zealand Foundation for the Blind, or of the Blind, asked me to come and do some speaking. It was, of course, after September 11th, and I was pretty visible. So I went down and actually helped them raise something like close to $300,000 by giving a
Uh,
bunch of speeches around New Zealand. But I remember listening to the radio and hearing all the irate people because New Zealand lost, the government didn't put enough money into it, and we shouldn't have lost. It was pretty fascinating to hear all of
yeah.
that.
There was a campaign called the Loyal Campaign, which was basically trying to reprimand the Kiwi sailors that defected. At the end of the day, it's a professional sport.
Yeah,
There were nationality rules, but it was really residency. So as long as they signed on with the Swiss team within a certain time period, it was like 2 years or something, and basically set up a residence in Switzerland, and they were eligible to compete. And I think there's been a history of that since. The New Zealand government having obviously supported Team New Zealand because it's certainly an investment in the national industry and
sure.
tourism and everything that comes with it. And I think they did walk that back, particularly for the last event. And the latest result of that is that the Kiwis defended in Spain last time around, which is again unusual.
Well, it was fascinating to watch the races, and we watched them. It was before I went to New Zealand, but that's why my wife and I watched because we knew I was going there, and it was all being defended in New Zealand. And of course, they were using sails, and the yachts were just going at normal sailboat type speeds. But I know then later, so much redesign took place, and the boats started traveling significantly faster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a change in that respect. Just on the atmosphere in Auckland, again, with my perspective, having as I said, obsessed over sailing, worked my way up, got involved in campaigns, helped to, put sponsors together with skippers to get funding to build boats. And arriving in Auckland with the prospect of trialing with a team, you walk out of the airport and there's the actual boat that won the Cup in '95 was sitting in the car park. There are posters. You can really see, like they called it the City of Sails.
Mm.
And as I arrived, the round the world race was stopping by in Auckland, so there was a sort of festive um, atmosphere around that. And you could really see people were getting behind it and getting involved, and it felt, they had parades at the beginning of the event. So it was really special to be there at a time when there was maybe 12 teams. It was a big event.
Yeah.
Um, and to your point, they were symmetrical ballasted monohulls. So they were fairly conservative, long, narrow, heavy boats. And the competition was really to eke out a 1 or 2% gain, to have better maneuverability for match racing. And it was really down to that kind of refinement. Then what happened after 2007, I mentioned a sort of hiatus. Basically, two teams took each other to court and they went back to what they call a deed of gift match, which is the default terms that they have to abide by if they can't agree to a mutually agreeable protocol. And that deed of gift match ended up being in multi-hulls. So there was a catamaran and a trimaran,
Mm.
and they were big and fast. And I think then when the Americans won out of that, they sort of got seduced by, let's make this about the fastest sailors in the fastest boats. So they went to multi-hulls. The next evolution was hydrofoiling multi-hulls, and then once the boats are out of the water, the drag drops dramatically, and now they can go really fast. They ended up the Kiwis ended up narrowly losing in San Francisco.
Yeah.
The Americans then defended in Bermuda. The Kiwis eventually won in Bermuda, and then they, in sort of consultation with the challenger of record, that was the Italians, they wanted to go back to monohulls, but they wanted them to be fast monohulls, and so they came up with this concept of a hydrofoiling monohull. So the boats now are certainly the fastest they've ever been, and the nature of the racing has changed, where it's more of a drag race than a sort of tactical match race. But it's still fascinating because it's all about that last bit of technology, and it's all about resource management. You have so much time, you have so much budget. How do you get to the highest performance within that time that you can access, that the sailors can get the best out of? So it's all a balance of many variables, and it's certainly tactical and strategic and very fascinating.
But hasn't a lot of the tactics, in a sense, gone out of it because it's now so much, as you put it, a drag race or a speed race, that a lot of the strategies of outmaneuvering your opponents isn't the same as it used to be?
Yeah, so if you imagine, the way you think about it is it's a multi-dimensional space. You've got all sorts of values that you can dial in, and the weighting of the values changes depending on the boat and the racing format and the weather. So on a traditional monohull, maneuvers are relatively cheap because the boat carries momentum. So when you tack, you go through the eye of the wind, you lose drive for a second, 3 seconds, but your speed doesn't drop that much because the boat's heavy and it just powers along. And so if you have a 3-degree shift in the direction of the wind, it's worth tacking on that because you'll then get the advantage of having a better angle. Similarly, if you're interacting with another boat, tacking to get out of their dirty air or tacking to sit on top of them is worthwhile. And so you get that. The incentive is I can spend some energy on a maneuver because I'm going to get a gain.
Right.
When you have boats that are extremely fast, and we're talking 3-4 times faster than the wind, if the wind direction changes by 3 degrees, it's almost immaterial. And so it's not worth tacking on it. If you go through the dirty air of another boat, you get through it really quickly. And on the other hand, when you maneuver, you go from flying on the hydrofoils to gliding. You only have like a few boat lengths that you can do that for before the hull touches the water, and then you virtually stop. And so basically the aim is you minimize maneuvers. You roll with the wind shifts, you roll with your opponent. And hence they've had to put boundaries around the course to force the boats back together, because otherwise I'd go out to a corner, do one tack, and then go to the top mark. And so it's a different racing. It's still, there are tactics involved, but the trade-offs are different. The cost versus reward of different tactical choices is very different.
But the race obviously goes with the newer designs goes a lot faster, and it isn't hours and many hours of racing as it used to be. Is that right?
It's also a shorter course, so the format
Ah,
is kind of optimized for television, really, for
yeah.
live broadcast.
There you
So
go.
you have many short races, and it does mean that if you have a big disparity, like if one boat makes a mistake and falls a long way behind, it's over pretty quickly. Because
Yeah.
it did happen in the past where you get a boat that was outmatched or did something wrong, and they'll just spend 3 hours following the leader with no chance of catching up. So there's certainly merit to having short, sharp races. But I think it's probably more physical and less cerebral. Like if you look at
Yeah.
the way the old boats worked, you had 17 people on there providing all the mechanical power, maneuvering, putting spinnakers up and down, dip pole jibing, moving their weight around the boat. You had a tactician. They would have conversations about what's happening and react, in a matter of seconds, not in a matter of milliseconds. Now you have 8 people on the boat. 4 of them are just pedaling bikes, basically, to put pressure into an accumulator to run the hydraulics. You have a helmsman on each side, and you have a trimmer on each side. And they
Hmm.
don't cross the boat because the boats are so fast that it's actually dangerous to get out of the cockpit. So it's very much more, um, I guess, closer to sort of Formula One in terms of it. You've got speeds, you've got the reaction times are shorter. Everything happens more quickly, and there's certainly less interaction between the boats.
Do you have a preference of whether you like more the old way or the newer way of doing the races and the way the boats are designed?
But if pressed, I would say I prefer the old way, but that's probably the bias because I was involved more back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's equally fascinating, and
It
that sort of
sounds
brings
like
me
it.
to the yeah. So even we'll get into how it applies to business and things like that, and it's the
Hmm.
same problem just with different variables. So my view with the cup was whatever the rules are, you've got to try and win within them. And so
Yeah.
they will change. The boat will change, the venue will change, the weather will change, budget limitations, all these things play into this multivariant problem. And your job is to balance all those variables to get the best outcome.
Right. You're not
So
the one
whether
that's
that
making the rules.
exactly, I mean the teams do have a say. So I was, for example, in the committee that designed the rule for the catamarans that went to San Francisco. Having said that, what we thought we were encouraging by the rules and what actually happened was nothing to do with each other. Because once you set the rules, then the fascinating thing is how people interpret them, and they'll interpret them in ways that you can't possibly imagine,
Yeah.
hence unintended consequences. But yeah, you have a say, but ultimately they are what they are, and the point of competing is to do well within those rules.
Yep.
Having said that, if they get to the point where you're just not interested anymore, then don't compete. But it is what it is.
Yeah. So how long did you do yacht design and so on, dealing with the cup?
Probably 15 years altogether. It was 12 or so in the actual America's Cup, and a few years before that, working up to it, doing various different projects. And that's sort of in a professional capacity, getting paid. Before that, as a passion, it's pretty much my whole, certainly my
Hmm.
teens, maybe a few years before that as well.
So what did you do after that?
I started my own business.
There you go. Well, tell us about the business and what you started with.
Yeah, so the aim was what we call long range aerial data capture. So a fancy way of saying drones with a long range that can carry out surveys effectively. So whether it's taking photographs, video, LiDAR scans, or combinations thereof. Um, the the sort of underlying motivation was um, the importance of data. So having come out of the America's Cup and seen that the way you develop is you interrogate what's happening with the boat and the crew and the conditions. And the more channels of information you have, the more informed decisions you can make about improving. Now, applying that to real world problems, to things like linear infrastructure, to mining, to land management, it seemed like to me there's a gap where if you could have better aerial data, you could make better decisions. And I happen to have a tool in the design and manufacturing processes that came out of the America's Cup that would allow me to create a lightweight airframe that would have that efficiency and be able to give that range. And this was at a time when people were already starting to think of drones as a solution. There was a lot of hype around them, but it was really all around the electronics, around multi-rotors, around things that you could effectively buy and put up in the air and do a short mission with and then land. The idea of a long-range drone, other than in the military, was pretty much unexplored.
Mm-hmm.
And I think largely because to make it work commercially, financially, you needed the range. You need to be able to cover in the order of hundreds of kilometers in one flight
Mm-hmm.
so that you're not having a ground crew effectively driving the line, relocating from point to point as the survey is carried out. And so initially it was fairly conservative in the sense that the main focus was to set up that manufacturing capability. So basically copy or transfer or those process out of the America's Cup into a commercial setting. So making molds, curing carbon, the way you document it, the way you go about it, that design process. And I was open to doing, custom work to subsidize it basically. So doing stuff again for sailboats, for racing cars, for architecture, just with that composite manufacturing capability as a way to prove it and refine it. And whatever money was coming out of that was going into developing a drone airframe. And then I was fortunate enough to have a collaboration with a former colleague of mine in the Cup who set up a business in Spain doing computational fluid dynamics. And he alerted me to a contract over there for a military surveillance research drone. We by then had an airframe that more or less we could demonstrate. And we could show that it was lighter and was more efficient and it would fly further and it had a more stable flying path and all of that. And so we won that contract, we supplied that, and then out of that came the commercial offering, and it basically grew from there.
So when did you start dealing with the drone design, the airframe, and so on? What?
Probably 2015.
Okay. Yeah, I think I had started hearing about drones by then. And in fact, I know I had by that time, but yeah, they were still fairly new. Um, so how far would your drone travel?
So we have two versions. The all-electric one will do a couple of 100 kilometers.
Mm.
The petrol hybrid one will do up to 800.
It,
And so we're really squarely in the territory of crewed helicopter, small fixed wing planes like Cessnas. And we're really going into that same way of operating. So we're not so much selling the drone to a utility to do their scans. We are providing the data that comes out of the scan, and we're using the drone as our tool to get that data. And by effectively mirroring the model of the traditional sort of legacy aviation, we can offer obviously lower cost, but also better data because we fly lower and slower, so we can get a higher resolution and more accuracy. And there's obviously carbon footprint reduction because we're burning about
yeah.
2% of the fuel, and it's quieter and it's safer and all of that stuff. So it's really doing that close in aerial survey work over large distances, the way it's currently being done, but with a better tool.
So the electric drone you said only goes maybe a couple of 100 kilometers. Is that basically because of battery issues? There's only so much that they can produce right now?
Sorry, Michael, you dropped out for a minute. Could you repeat that?
My question was the electric drone, you said only goes a couple 100 kilometers. Is that basically because of battery issues?
Absolutely, yeah. It's
Yeah.
basically power density. So not so much energy density, but power density. Really how much energy you can store in the
Yeah.
battery in terms of mass. And obviously the fact that you're not burning it off, so you're carrying the empty battery around with you.
Right. Any interest in, or has there been any exploration of making solar powered drones?
We've certainly looked into it, and we've develop relationships with suppliers that are developing specialized, conformal, curvy solar panels that form part of the structure of the wing. There are a couple of considerations. Most prominent is the trade-off that you're making. Like if you add solar panels to a wing, even if they're integrated in the structure and you minimize the structural weight, they will have a mass. So call it an extra kilo.
Yeah.
Right now, if I were to take that extra kilo and put it in battery or in fuel, I would be better off. So I'd have more energy by doing that than by having the solar panel.
Yeah. We're not
Uh,
dealing
on
with
average.
efficiency yet. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously on a hot day when you're flying with the sun directly above you, probably it would be better. But over the course of a day, different locations, banking, etc., it's just not there yet, net. Particularly considering that there'll be a degradation and there'll be a maintenance that's required as the panels deteriorate and the various connections break down, etc. So it's not something you'd rule out. Then the secondary consideration is when you look at our aircraft, it's fairly skinny, long, skinny wings. When you look at the area from above, there's not a lot of projected area. And
Yeah.
particularly the wings being thin and very high aspect ratio, um, you wouldn't really be able to fit that much area
Right.
when it comes to.
With
And then
solar.
you've got to
Right.
remember also that if you're generating while you're flying, your electronics have to be very different because you have to have some way to manage that power, balance it off against the battery itself. The battery is multi-cell, it's a 12S system, so you then have to balance that charging. So there's some complexity involved. There's a weight penalty, potentially a drag penalty. There is a net advantage in a very narrow range of conditions. And overall, we're just not there yet in terms of the advantage. And even if you could extend the range by a few minutes, because we have an aircraft that can fly for 8 hours, doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So dealing with an electric drone again, have you ever looked into things like fuel cells as opposed to batteries, or does it not make a big
We have,
difference?
and there's a company in France that we've been collaborating with that's developing a hydrogen fuel cell.
Yeah, that's what
Um,
I was wondering.
yeah, and again, this is about it. Sort of maybe sounds a bit conservative, but drawing these lessons from the America's Cup that I was talking about, being seduced by the latest shiny thing can come at the detriment of achieving what you need to achieve today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very conscious in the business in Carbonix of having this roadmap where there's a lot of nice to haves. There's a lot of capability that we want going forward. And that's everything from the remote one-to-many operations, detect and avoid, fail safes, additional comms, all stuff that will enable us to do what we're doing today plus X, Y, Z. But we need to be able to do what we have to do today. And most of the missions that we're doing, they're over a power line in the middle of nowhere. They're in relatively non-congested airspace. The coordination is relatively simple. We have the ability to go beyond visual line of sight. We have the range. So it's really, let's use what we have today and put all the other stuff in time and space
Yeah.
as the business grows, the mission grows, the customers get more comfortable. And that's a way to then maintain the advantage. But it's very easy to get sucked into doing cool R&D at the expense of delivering today.
Yeah, it's R&D is great, but you still got to pay the bills. Um,
Yeah.
so you have worked across several industries. What's kind of the common thread for you working across and designing in several industries?
So I think it's a high level problem solving. It's having an outcome that's very clearly defined and a rule set and a set of constraints. And the challenge is how do you balance all those elements to deliver the best value? So
Mm-hmm.
whether it's how do you design a boat within a rule to go as fast as possible, how do you develop a drone to fly as long as possible given a certain time and budget availability, you're always looking at variables that will each have their own pros and cons, and how do you combine them? So things like, team size versus burn rate versus how aggressively you go to market, how do you select your missions, how do you decide whether to say yes or no to a customer based on the overall strategy. I see that as you have all these variables that you can tweak. You're trying to get an outcome. how do you balance and weigh them all to get that outcome?
Yeah. Well, you've
Uh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, I have also like an interest in motorsport, and when you look at a Formula One strategy, same thing, right? Do you carry a fuel load? Do you change tires? Do you optimize your aero for this? It's a similar type of problem. You're saying, this is my aim. I've got all these variables. How do I set them all in a way that it gives me the best outcome?
Yeah, and in your design and as you construct and look at what you're doing, you decide exactly what the parameters are, and you know when you're going to change the tires, or you know when it's time to put in more fuel or whatever. And see, you've got to really know the product very well.
Absolutely. And again, in the case of sailboat racing, it's almost exemplary because the rules are spelled out.
Yeah,
And it's a very artificial set of constraints. So you have a race day, you'll have your budget, and obviously you can work to increase that, but the time is what it is. And then in the rules, you actually get to trade off, length versus width versus mass versus sail area. Do I make my boat more powerful so it goes faster in strong winds, or do I make it skinnier so it goes better in light winds? You look at the history of the weather in the venue. And the teams that win are the ones that get all those mostly right. So it's
yeah,
not necessarily the latest, fastest, most extreme solution. It's the one that best balances all these variables. And
yeah,
you transfer that into business, and it's a similar thing. You've got funding, you've got burn rate, you've got people, you've got customers, probably more variables, and it's a little bit more fuzzy in some cases. So you need to work harder to nail these things down. And it's a longer term, it's an open-ended prospect. It's not, I've just got a race on Sunday, then I can have a break for 6 months.
yeah.
It's you do it today and tomorrow, so it's got to be sustainable. But the way you think about it in the abstract, it's the same.
And you also have to keep evolving as technology grows, as the industry grows, as demands change, or maybe better than saying as demands change, as you foresee demands changing, you have to be able to keep up with it. And there's a lot to all that. There's a lot of challenge that someone like you has to really keep up with.
And it's a balance between leading and listening. So there's a classic Henry Ford line that if I'd asked a customer what he wanted, he would have told me a faster horse. We've fallen into the trap sometimes of talking to a customer and they're very set about, we want to use this camera to take this resolution at this distance because that's what we use on our helicopters or because that's what we use on our multi-rotor. And you have to unpack that and say, hang on, what data do you actually like? Because we have a different
Yeah,
payload, we fly in a different way. So let us tell you how we can give you that solution if you tell us what we want. And I think that applies across various sort of aspects of the business. But to your point about the continuous evolution, one of the most fascinating things out of this experience of the almost 10 years of sort of pioneering the drone industry is just how much the ecosystem has evolved.
hmm,
So when we started out, um, the naive assumption was we're good at making airframes. We can make really good, lightweight, efficient aircraft. We don't necessarily want to be an electronics manufacturer. It's a whole other challenge. Let's buy what we can off the shelf, put it in the aircraft for the command and control, and go fly. And we very quickly realized that for the standard that we wanted in terms of being able to satisfy a regulator that the reliability is at a certain point, having fail safes, having programmability, there was nothing out there. We had to go and design our own avionics because you could either buy hobby stuff that was inconsistent and of dubious quality, or you had to spend millions of dollars on something out of the military and then it didn't work commercially. And so we went and looked at cars and we said, okay, the CAN seems like, control area network seems like a good protocol. Let's adopt that. Oh, but some of the peripherals that we buy, like the servos, they don't speak CAN. So then we have to make a peripheral node that can translate from CAN to RS-232 or whatever. And we went through that process, but over the years, these suppliers that came out of hobby, came out of consumer electronics, came out of the military, very quickly saw the opportunity, and we were one of the companies driving it. That hang on, I can make an autopilot module that is ISO certified and has a certain quality assurance that comes with it. and I can make it in a form factor and at a price where a commercial drone company can use it. And so it really accelerated the last maybe 3, 4 years. There's a lot of stuff available that's been developed for commercial drones that now gives us a lot more options in terms of what we buy rather than what we make.
Well, now I have to ask, since you brought it up, does anybody use RS-232 anymore? I had to
uh,
ask. I mean,
less and less.
yeah,
But yeah, at one point, like we used it for our GPS pucks because we didn't have anything that ran on CAN.
right.
Slowly, we're replacing. So the latest version of the aircraft now is all CAN, but it took a while to get there.
I was going to say that's a very long RS-232 cable you have if you're going to communicate with the aircraft. That'd be. I still have here some RS-232 cables that I remember using them back in the 1980s and into the 1990s. But yeah,
Uh,
RS-232.
and
Ah, the
one of the
days.
most horrendous ones was there was I think it was a LiDAR altimeter. Someone will correct me. It ran on I squared C,
Oh
which is
gosh.
the most inappropriate possible thing. And it is what it is. So all we could do is shorten the wire length as much as possible and live with it until we found something better.
And then we also had parallel cables, which
Yes.
is, of course, how one connected printers. And
Yeah, we have Ethernet on the aircraft for the comms.
well, yeah,
There's a lot of translating that we need to do. And again, I'm not an electronics engineer, but I understand enough of it to know what's good and what's not.
yeah, yeah. Ah, the days have gone by with all of the RS-232 and parallel ports and all that. Now it's all USB and Ethernet and cams and other things like that, which make it
Mm.
kind of fun. Well, what other industries have you been involved in besides the drone and the boat or yacht world?
So I've done a little bit in cinema of all things, which was kind of fortuitous. The last of the Star Wars prequels was filmed in Sydney. And I happened to be here for a few months between America's Cup campaigns, and there was a few boat builders that were asked to go and do fiberglass work on the set. And they
Hmm.
recommended me to do some of the structural design work for some of the sets. I don't think I was credited, but it was fun. Um, Again, not something I planned to do long term. It just happened to come up, and I did
Hmm,
it for about 3 months.
there you go.
As I said, a little bit in motorsport, more as a hobby, but as an interest. But we've made in the early days of Carbonix, we made spoilers and wings and bits and pieces for cars when we were getting going. But mainly the sailing and the drones, really, because I've been in the drones now for 10 years. So
Right. What Why did you switch, or maybe why isn't the wrong answer, but what made you switch from doing yachts to drones, and how did the drone story come about?
yeah, so I mentioned the angle of the importance of data, looking for a real world problem where data was going to make a difference, and having the right solution, not a solution in search of a problem, but the right solution for this problem. Saying if we can design an airframe that can do this, there's an obvious advantage and an obvious saving that would make a difference to the world that has a big market. Um, Now that's the theory. Then to take the plunge, it was a bit of a combination of things. It was being beholden to the unpredictable movements of the cup, where your career depends on who wins and where it goes. And as a young single man, that's fantastic. Once you're trying to get married and have a family, it becomes a little bit more of a problem. So again, starting your own business doesn't exactly give you stability, but more stable, I guess. Um, and really that combination of an opportunity, um, being able to say, "Okay, I can actually see if I can make this work and see what happens." Uh, Wanting to be located in one place, I guess looking for variety as well, and knowing that I still could have contact with the America's Cup world because as I said I was doing custom work and we had people from the Cup working in Carbonix. But it's really that point where you say, do I want to keep following the circus around the world, or do I
Hmm.
want to try and do my own thing and see how that goes? And I can always go back. Um, and the aim is, once you're committed, then you sort of tend to try and make it work no matter what, and it becomes the new aim, and that's what you put your energy into.
I had a guest on Unstoppable Mindset named Dre Baldwin, and Dre was a professional basketball player for 9 years. He went to high school, was on the bench the whole time, went to college, played in college pretty well, um, but wasn't really noticed until he went to a camp where people could try out and be scouted by professionals who wouldn't come and see you because you weren't famous enough to be seen just by them coming to look for you. But he got a video and he got some good suggestions. And anyway, he eventually made that into a 9 year career. And I asked him when we talked, why did you end the career? Why did you leave and start a business? And the business he started was Up Your Game LLC, and it's all about uh, helping people up their game in business and so on. And of course, he does it all in a sports environment. But I asked him why he left, and one of the things that he said was, what people don't know is it's not just the games themselves and the basketball that you're playing. It's all the other stuff. It's all the fact that if you're going to really do it and be reasonably well, you need to go to the gym a lot, not just when they tell you to practice, but you got to take the initiative and do it on your own. You have to do other things. And he said, I just got to the point where I didn't want to do that, all that invisible part of it anymore. And so he left and started his own business and has been very successful. But it was an interesting answer. And in a sense, I hear, what you're saying. It's really where you're going to go and what's really going to interest you, which is what has to be part of whatever you do.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think in my experience, I've never not had an obsession, so to speak. So,
Yeah,
um, with the sailing, absolutely. Like if you want to be in the America's Cup, it can't be a day job.
right.
You have to be
Hmm.
committed. You have to be able to concentrate, innovate. Again, I wasn't an athlete on the boat, so it wasn't necessarily about going to the gym, but certainly doing research, doing testing, working on the boat overnight before I went out the next day. It is a competition, so the longer, the harder you work, assuming you still keep your performance up, the better you're going to do. So it was an obsession. I accepted that. It never occurred to me that I don't want to keep doing it.
Right.
It was really the logistics. It was thinking because the cup had gone to court, we'd had the deed of gift match, everything had been on hold for a while. It got going again, and the rules changed, and there were fewer teams. I'd actually spent a bit of time fundraising for the team that had come out of Valencia to keep
Hmm.
it going until the eventual San Francisco Cup. So that was interesting as well, seeing that is it getting the reception that I hoped it would in terms of people investing in it and seeing the value, um, and kind of looking at it and saying, okay, now I've got to move to San Francisco. The next one, who knows where it's going to be. Um, the format and all those things, you just sort of trade it off and you say, well, if I can make a go of something where I can do it in my hometown, it can be just as interesting because the technical challenge is just as fascinating. And it's really about, can I create this little environment that I control where I can do the same fun stuff that I was doing in the cup in terms of tech development, but also make it a business and make a difference to the world and make it commercially viable. And that was really the challenge, and saying that was the motivation to say, if I can take the thing that interests me from the cup and apply it to a commercial technological challenge, then I'll have the best of both worlds.
What made you really go into doing drones after the yacht stuff?
So yeah, the certainly that aerial data capture piece,
Hmm.
but also it's very analogous. So most of the work that I was doing in the cup was around aeroelastic optimization, lightweight structures,
Which really is the same.
hydrodynamics.
Yeah.
And so, a yacht is a plane with one wing in the water and one wing in the air. Um, it's all fluids. The maths is the same. The physics is the same. The materials are the
Yeah.
same. Um, if you do it well in the cup, you win. If you do it well in drones, you win also, but you win by going further and being more efficient and economical at doing these missions. And so it's sort of like having this superpower where you can say, I can make this tool really good. That's going to give me an advantage. Let's go and see if that actually makes a difference in the market.
Well, I mean, as we know, the only difference really between water and air is that the molecules are further apart in air than they are in water. So why it really isn't that much different. He said, being a physicist and picking on chemists, but I do understand what you're saying. So when did you actually start Carbonix? Was that when you went into the drone world?
So the business itself, early 2012.
Okay, a
And
little
then, as
bit
I said, there
before.
was a few years there where we were doing custom work. Um, and again, as it happened, I ended up supplying to New Zealand because we built an A-class catamaran, which is effectively a little America's Cup boat for the punters kind of thing. Um, that did well in some regattas. It caught the attention of the Team New Zealand guys. They decided to use them as a training platform. We did a world championship where they were skippering the boats that Carbonix built. Did really well in that, sort of top 5 spots. Got a bunch of commercial orders off the back of that, which then brought some money in to subsidize the drones, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time we were properly, sort of first time we flew our airframe would have been, 2015.
But nobody has created an America's Cup for drones yet. So there's a project for you.
There are sort of drone racing
I'm not
circuits.
surprised.
Yeah, and I think again, it's really interesting. So when you look at motorsport and yacht racing in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, it really was a test bed because you had to build something, go compete with it, learn from it, repeat, and you'd get,
Hmm.
in the case of motorsport, traction control, ABS, all that stuff. In the case of sailing, the use of modern fiber materials for ropes and structures. That was really sort of the cauldron where the development happened.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that was sort of the result of an analog world, so to speak, where you had to
Hmm.
build things to know. I think now with better compute and a more sophisticated role that simulations can play, it's still there is value in competition, but I think it's done in a different way. You're doing it. The key is to iterate virtually as much as possible before you build something, rather than building as many things as possible and doing the development that way.
Well, here's an
And
interesting. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and so I think that affects certainly how sport is seen in terms of there's probably more emphasis on the actual athletic competition than on the technology, because there are just other areas now where that development is happening, and SpaceX, drones. Um, there are more commercial places where control systems, electronics, structures are really being pushed.
Hmm.
Well, before it was mainly in sport.
Well, here's a business question for you. How do you identify value that is something that you uniquely can do that other people can't, and that, here's the big part, people will pay for?
Um, Cost per kilometer of scan is really my answer in the case of Carbonix. It's saying you want to get a digital twin of a power transmission line over 800 kilometers. You can do that with a helicopter, and it's going to cost thousands of dollars, and you're going to burn tons of fuel, and you can only get so close, et cetera. So you can only do it in visual conditions.
Hmm.
And that's sort of the current best practice. That's how it's done. You can do it with satellites, but you can't really get in close enough yet in terms of resolution, and you're
Hmm.
dependent on orbits and weather. You can do it by having someone drive or walk along the line, and that's stupendously inefficient. You can do it with multi-rotor drones, and then yeah, you might be able to do 5 kilometers at a time, but then you've got to land and relocate and launch again, and you end up with this big sort of disparity of data sets that you've got to stitch together. By the time you add that all up, it's actually more expensive than a helicopter. Or you could do it with a drone that can fly for 800 kilometers.
Which is
And
the whole
making
point.
it, yes, and making a drone that can fly for 800 kilometers is not trivial. And that's where the unique value sits. And it's not just the airframe, that the airframe holds it all up. But you have to have the redundancies, the command and control, the engineering certifications, the comms, the stability, the payload triggering and geotagging. So all of that stuff has to work. And the value of Carbonix is, yes, the carbon fiber in the airframe, but also the team ethos, which again comes out of that competition world, to really grab the low hanging fruit, make it all work, get it out there, and be flexible. Like we've had missions where stuff hasn't gone to plan, and we've fixed it, and we've still delivered the data. So the value is really being able to do something that no one else can do.
So, um, I assume that you're still having fun as the founder and the owner of a company.
Sometimes.
Yeah. More often than
Um,
not, one would hope.
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of pride in seeing, now we're 22 people. Some of, certainly leaders in the field, some of the best in the world. The fact that they have chosen to back the vision, to spend years of their professional life making it happen according to the thing that I started. I mean, that's flattering and humbling. It's always a challenge. It's always interesting. Um, Again, having investors and all that, it's not all on my shoulders. There's
No.
people that are also invested, literally, who have the same interests, and we support each other. Um, but at the same time, it's not exactly certain in terms of you're always working through crisis and looking at what's going to happen in a day, a year, 6 months. Um, but you sort of get used to it. You say, well, I've done this willingly. I know there's a risk, but it's fun and it's worth it, and we'll get there. And so you do it.
Well, you're the visionary, and that brings excitement to it all. And as long as you can have fun and you can reward yourself um, by what you're doing, it doesn't get any better than that.
So they tell me.
Yeah. How do you how do
Absolutely.
how do you create a good cohesive team?
Values, I think, are the base of it. Would be very clear about what we are and what we aren't. Um, it's really interesting because I've never really spent any time in a corporate environment, nor do I want to.
Hmm.
So keeping that informal, fun element where it's fairly egalitarian, it's fairly focused. We're not too worried about saying things how they are and offending people. We know we're all in it together. It's very much that focus and common goal, I think, creates the bond. And then communication, like being absolutely clear about
Hmm.
what are we trying to do, what are the priorities, what are the constraints, and constantly updating each other when one department is having an issue and it's going to hold something up. We support each other and we adjust accordingly and we move resources around. But yeah, I think the short answer is culture. You have to have, when someone walks in, there's a certain quality to the atmosphere that tells you what this team is about.
Right.
And everyone is on that page, and it's not for everyone. Again, we don't demand that people put in their heart and soul into it 24/7, but if you don't, you probably don't want to be there.
Yeah. Well, makes sense. So, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's starting out in their career or considering what they want to do with their life?
Where do I start? Certainly take the risks while you're young and independent. When you don't have a lot to lose. Um, give it a go and be humble. So,
Hmm.
again, in my experience going into the cup, like my approach was, I'll clean the floors. I'll be the gopher. I'll work for free until you guys see some value. It's not about what am I going to get out of this. It's how do I get involved and how do I prove myself. And so being open and learning, being willing to put in the hours. And I think at one point there was a comment during the trial that he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's really keen and his attitude is good. And I think that's how you want to be, because you can learn the thing, but you need to have the attitude to be involved and have a go.
But you do have to
Um,
have fun.
yeah,
Or or you have
I
to
guess that's
decide
presupposed, right? You
you
can't.
have to
You,
decide to have fun.
yeah, absolutely. You have to be interested in what you're doing because if you're doing it for the money, yes, it's nice when you get the paycheck, but you don't have that passion to really be motivated and put in the time. So
Right.
find it's that the Venn diagram, right? Find something you're interested in that someone is willing to pay you for and that you're good at. Not
Yeah.
easy, but
No.
having that openness and the humble and saying, look, I'm don't try and get to the top straight away. Like get in, prove yourself, learn, improve, gain skills. Um, And probably in my case, the value of cross-pollination. So rather than sort of going into one discipline and just learning how it's done and only seeing that, look at the analogous stuff out there and see how you can apply it.
Yeah.
So again, from boats to drones, from cars to boats, from uh, racing to business, abstract the problem into what are we trying to solve, what are the variables, how's it been done elsewhere, and really knowing when to think by analogy and when to think from first principles.
That makes sense. And with that, I'm going to thank you. We've been doing this for an hour. My gosh, is life fun or what? But I really
Time
appreciate you.
flies.
Well, there you go. I appreciate you being here, and this has been a lot of fun. I hope that all of you out there watching and listening have liked our podcast episode. Please let us know. I'd appreciate it if you'd email me, Michael H.I. at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson, that's MICHAELHINGSON.com/podcast. And I would ask you, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to reach out to you and maybe learn more about what you do, maybe join the team?
Yeah, probably the easiest way would be LinkedIn, just Dario Valenza. Otherwise, my email is just Dario, Dario, at carbonix.com.au, being
And
Australian.
Valencia is spelled
Valenza. But the email is just Dario at carbonix.com.au.
right.
You don't need to know how to spell my last name.
Right. That's
Yeah.
good to have
But
it
yeah,
on
sorry,
there.
for the LinkedIn, it'll be Dario Valenza, Valenza. Or look at the Carbonix profile on LinkedIn and I'll be one of the people who works there.
There you go.
Mm.
Well, again, this has been fun, and we appreciate you and hope that people will reach out and want to learn more. Um, if you know of anybody who might make a good guest, or if any of you watching or listening out there might know of anyone who would be a good guest for Unstoppable Mindset, I sure would appreciate it if you'd let us know. We really value your help with that. We're always looking for more people to be on the podcast. So please don't hesitate. And also, wherever you're listening or watching, we sure would appreciate if you give us a 5-star rating. We really appreciate your reviews, especially when they're positive, but we like all the comments. So, however you're listening and so on, please give us a 5-star rating and let us know how we can even do better next time. But Dario, again, I want to thank you. Really appreciate you being here with us today. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad I learned a lot today. So, thank you very much.
My pleasure.